My name is Jake, and I never thought I'd find myself in this position, standing in front of people I don't really know, trying to smile while my wife casually ripped me apart, piece by piece, in front of them all. Sarah had always been the life of the party, the one who could turn heads and hold the room's attention with a flick of her hair and a laugh that could melt any ice. It's what I loved about her when we first met. She had this way of making everything feel special, of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. I was just happy to be her anchor, the guy who quietly supported her. But tonight, that all changed. We were at a dinner party with some of her friends. The kind of friends who always praised her, made jokes, and laughed at every word she said, no matter how sharp or biting. I was used to it, but tonight it felt different. I kept feeling this knot in my stomach as she smiled and spoke, as if something was just off. The evening was going smoothly enough. I tried to stay out of the spotlight, sipping my drink, watching the conversation swirl around me. But then I felt her eyes on me, her words suddenly turning the tide. "Don't even get me started on Jake," she said, her voice so light and carefree. "Honestly, it's like living with a little toy. Cute, right? But ultimately useless when it counts. He tries, but it's always the same half effort, like he's just going through the motions." Her friends laughed, a round of giggles that seemed to echo in my ears. I didn't laugh along. I couldn't. The laughter felt like a weight sinking deeper in my chest. This wasn't the first time Sarah had made me feel small in front of others. But tonight was different. Before I could respond, Sarah went on, her voice so casually dismissive. "And in the bedroom? Well, let's just say he's a bit too short." I froze. "Too short?" The words hung in the air, like a sudden chill in a room full of warmth. It wasn't a comment about my height, not in the literal sense, but in the way she said it. Like a jab at something I had no control over. Something that had become a running joke in our marriage. And she wasn't the least bit ashamed to air it out for everyone to hear. Her friends didn't even hesitate. They chuckled again, clearly amused. Too short? Not enough? She didn't just say it. She paraded it. It wasn't a joke. It was a declaration. To her, I was a constant disappointment, someone who couldn't satisfy her in any sense. I felt the heat rise in my face, my fingers gripping my glass tighter, knuckles white. The room suddenly felt too tight, like I couldn't breathe, like I was suffocating in the silence of my own thoughts. Was this how she saw me? Was this how she had always seen me? I had worked so hard for this marriage, spent countless nights, put in so much effort, made sacrifices. But to her, I was just a toy, cute but ultimately pointless, a short version of what she wanted. And now in front of everyone, I was nothing more than the punchline of her cruelest joke. I tried to keep my composure. I couldn't let her see how badly it hurt, how badly it shook me. But the truth was, it crushed me. I stayed quiet as usual, because silence was the only thing I had left. I knew if I said anything, it would just escalate. Her friends would join in, mocking me further, and Sarah, she would only laugh it off, like it was just another part of the act. And for once, I wasn't going to play along. Not this time. But inside, everything had shifted. When the night ended, I didn't yell. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I didn't even speak. I just stood up, walked out to the car, and let the cold air hit my face. It was like a reset, a moment where I realized what had been happening to me all these years. I had been silent for too long. The drive home was silent. I didn't want to fight. I didn't want to engage. I just wanted to be alone with my thoughts. I kept replaying the words in my head, too short, and I started to see everything in a new light. All those times I'd sacrificed, all those nights I'd stayed up late, all those mornings when I made sure she had everything she needed. For what? To be made a joke in front of strangers? To be humiliated in my own home? When we got home, she expected me to play it off like I always did. She expected me to laugh it off, pretend it didn't hurt. But this time, I didn't say a word. I just walked straight to our room, started packing a bag. She stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with confusion. But I didn't look back. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just done. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need to make her understand. Her words had already shown me everything I needed to know. It wasn't just the words Sarah said that night at the dinner. It was the way she said them, the way she meant them. It was as if she was relishing in every syllable, as if she was proud of the way she could crush me in front of her friends. She never saw me. Not really. Not as a person, just a tool, a fixture in her life that she could use and discard as she pleased. But I was done. The night we got home, she was on her usual high, buzzing from the attention she'd received. Her laugh echoed through the house, light, carefree, like nothing had happened. I could hear her heels clicking on the wooden floors as she walked ahead of me, making her way into the kitchen. I stood there, frozen for a moment, my body trembling with a mix of frustration and hurt. The cold air of the night clung to my skin, the sting of her words still fresh in my ears. Too short. I could still hear the laugh that followed, her friends' amusement, their disbelief at how effortlessly she had brought me down. How could she do that to me? How could she tear me apart like that without even a second thought? It wasn't the first time. No, far from it. But tonight felt different. It felt like a breaking point. I walked into the kitchen watching her as she opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of wine. She didn't even notice me at first, lost in her own world, completely unaware of how shattered I felt standing there. But I wasn't about to let this go. I slammed my hand on the counter, making her jump. "Why did you do that?" I asked, my voice louder than I intended. "Why did you say that in front of them?" Sarah looked up, her eyes wide for a moment, before she quickly masked it with a smirk. "Oh, come on, Jake," she said, pouring herself a glass of wine, not even looking me in the eye. "It was just a joke. You know how I am. I didn't mean anything by it." I clenched my fists. "A joke?" I repeated, stepping closer. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You made it sound like I'm nothing, like I'm insignificant." Her smirk didn't fade, but something flickered in her eyes, a glimmer of something I couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe, or just annoyance. "You're overreacting. It's not like you've been perfect, Jake. We both know that." There it was, the justification, the blame shifting. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even close. She was just trying to twist it around, to make me feel like I was the one who was wrong. "You can't just say something like that and pretend it doesn't matter," I said, my voice shaking now, not with fear but with rage. "You can't keep treating me like a joke, like I'm just here to serve you. I'm not your damn punching bag." She rolled her eyes. "Jesus, Jake, you're so dramatic. I'm not the one who's been acting like a robot, like I'm just here to keep you happy. Maybe if you tried a little harder." I took a step back. The words hit harder than I expected. "Maybe if you tried a little harder." There it was again, her way of twisting things, making it seem like it was all my fault. It was always my fault. For a moment, I just stood there, seething, watching her sip her wine, completely unbothered. My heart raced, my mind screaming for me to just do something. I snapped. "Maybe I've been trying for too long," I said, my voice low but filled with venom. "Maybe I've given everything I had and still nothing." Her eyes flicked up from her glass, a flicker of surprise before her mask of indifference slid back into place. "What are you talking about?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "You're being ridiculous." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I'm done being ridiculous. Done pretending that I don't see how you look at me, how you talk about me behind my back. I'm not a damn joke, Sarah. Not anymore." I could feel the room growing smaller, the air between us thick with tension. For a moment she said nothing. Her lips parted as if she was about to speak, but the words didn't come. I stared at her, waiting, willing her to say something that would make me feel like she actually cared. But she didn't. Instead, she just stood there, taking another sip of her wine, as if I hadn't just bared my soul to her, as if my words hadn't hit her at all. The silence between us stretched, and for the first time, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt either. I was just done. The quiet, the stillness of the moment was more deafening than anything we'd ever said to each other. And that's when I decided. I wasn't going to beg for her love. I wasn't going to plead for her respect. I wasn't going to fight anymore. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, not looking back. I didn't need to say anything else. There was nothing left to say. The house felt different when I came back that night. It wasn't just the emptiness I had become so accustomed to. It was the coldness, the biting indifference that stung like ice. I had spent the entire day reflecting on everything, every insult, every time she belittled me in front of friends, every time she made me feel like I was nothing more than an accessory in her life. When I walked in, the lights were dim. I could hear her voice from upstairs. Her laughter echoed down the hallway, sharp and hollow. But it wasn't a laugh that felt genuine. It was a laugh laced with cruelty. It was a laugh that mocked me. I froze. I couldn't place it at first, but something inside me shifted. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but it didn't matter. It was her tone, the way she was talking to whoever was on the other end of the phone. It was the same damn phone call I had overheard 100 times before. The conversation I was never meant to hear. The one where she complained about me like I was an inconvenience. I don't know why he even bothers anymore, she laughed bitterly. He's so predictable. I mean, I don't even have to tell him when to leave. He just knows. It's kind of pathetic, honestly. The words cut through me like a razor. Pathetic. I felt my jaw clench, but I kept my footsteps quiet, making my way up the stairs slowly. I wasn't going to let her see how badly it hurt. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me crack. When I reached the top of the stairs, I could hear her more clearly now. She was still talking to someone, but the words were blurring together. My blood boiled. I was done being her punching bag, done playing the role she wanted me to play. But tonight, I wasn't going to just disappear quietly. Tonight, I would make her face what she had done. I stepped into the bedroom. She didn't notice me right away. She was sitting on the bed scrolling through her phone, still chatting with whoever it was, laughing, making jokes. But when she finally looked up, her face dropped. She didn't expect me to be standing there. Her eyes flickered, guilt washing over her face for just a split second. But then she quickly masked it with that same smug indifference. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice casual, as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just ripped me apart with her words. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I walked to the dresser, grabbed my bag, and started packing. I could hear her sigh behind me. "You're not really going to do this again, are you?" Her voice was so annoyingly nonchalant, as if my leaving had become just another trivial inconvenience in her life. I zipped my bag shut. "You're right," I said, my voice cold. "I'm done." She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, Jake. This whole thing is pathetic. You're just trying to be dramatic again. You always do this." Her words stung like a slap, but I held my ground, refusing to let the hurt show on my face. "I'm done being your damn doormat," I said quietly. "You've been treating me like garbage for months, making me feel small in front of everyone, like I'm nothing. And now I'm done." She stared at me, then laughed again. But this time it was sharp and cruel. "Oh, so now you're going to play the victim? Is that it?" she sneered. "How predictable. It's always someone else's fault with you." I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't just about me being predictable. It wasn't about me playing the victim. This was her treating me like I wasn't even human. I set the bag down on the floor and turned to face her. "You're right. I've been predictable. I've spent every damn day of this marriage trying to make you happy, trying to be there for you, trying to be enough for you. But you know what? Nothing I do will ever be good enough for you." Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place. But I didn't care anymore. "You don't get it, do you?" I continued, stepping closer to her. "I don't owe you anything anymore. Not my time, not my love, not my loyalty. You've made it clear what you think of me. You think I'm nothing, and I'm done proving otherwise." She stood up then, the arrogance falling from her face, but I could see the panic creeping in now. "You don't mean that," she said, her voice softer, but the desperation was there. "Jake, please don't leave." But it was too late. "You don't get to act like this and expect me to stick around," I said, my voice low and firm. "I'm done. I'm leaving. And this time, I'm not coming back." Her expression twisted with anger, but there was something else there now. Fear. She tried to grab my arm as I turned to leave, but I shrugged her off. She hadn't touched me like that in years. "Don't touch me," I said through clenched teeth. "I didn't mean it, Jake." she said, her voice now cracking, almost pleading. I swear, I didn't mean it. Please don't go. I looked at her, but I didn't feel anything anymore. Not love, not anger, not even hurt. I just felt nothing. You didn't mean it? I asked, incredulous. You think you can just say things like that and I'm supposed to forget? You think I'll just forgive you because you said you didn't mean it? She didn't answer. Her lips trembled as she tried to find the right words, but she couldn't. There were no words left that could fix this. And that, right there, was the moment it all sank in. I had been nothing to her, just someone to belittle, to mock, to use as her emotional punching bag. I grabbed my keys from the table, my hands shaking now, but with a sense of finality that I couldn't ignore. I'm leaving, I said, turning back for one last time. I saw her face as I opened the door, the expression of someone who realized they had lost control. But there was nothing she could do, nothing left to say. As I stepped out of the door and into the night, I didn't look back. Not this time. Jake had spent the whole evening at work, trying to bury himself in the paperwork, to forget about what was happening at home. The constant feeling of being less than enough, the subtle jabs, and the cold indifference from Sarah had worn him down. But tonight, he was ready to face it. When he came back through the front door, the house was unusually quiet, almost too quiet. It wasn't like Sarah to be this still. As Jake slipped off his shoes, he noticed her voice drifting from upstairs, soft but unmistakable. At first, he thought it was a casual phone call, something about work or a friend. But then he heard a deeper voice, a man's voice, and the words made his heart sink. He froze in the hallway, not sure whether to walk in or turn back. The sound of the man's voice, so familiar, yet so foreign in their home, filled the space. Does he know? The man asked, his tone almost playful. Sarah's voice responded, as casual as ever. No, he's as clueless as always. He's so predictable. It's actually kind of funny. Jake felt his blood run cold. His stomach twisted, but he stayed rooted to the spot, listening. The man continued, his voice full of amusement. I mean, does he really think he's enough for you? Does he really believe you're still into him? Sarah's laugh echoed through the hallway, hollow and dismissive. Oh, please, I don't think he has any idea. He's so, well, let's just say he's not exactly the whole package in the way I need. Her tone was light, teasing, as though she was talking about a friend, not her husband. But I guess that's my fault for settling. There was a long pause before the man spoke again, clearly intrigued. And is it really that much of a difference? Jake felt the blood drain from his face. His heart was racing now. Does his gift measure up to mine? Sarah didn't hesitate. She let out a sigh. Honestly, no, his is a little shorter, a little less impressive, she said with a laugh, her voice light as she brushed it off. The man chuckled softly. Oh, I see. Poor guy doesn't even know. At that moment, Jake's heart slammed against his chest. It was all becoming so clear. The mocking tone, the casual way she dismissed everything he had given, every ounce of love, every attempt at being enough. He stepped into the living room, his mind racing, heart pounding. There was no turning back now. Jake walked up the stairs, each step heavier than the last. As he reached the top, the door to the bedroom was slightly ajar. He could hear their voices clearer now, and he couldn't stop himself from pushing the door open just enough to see them. Sarah was sitting on the bed, legs crossed, her back slightly turned toward him. The man was beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Neither of them noticed him, but the words Jake had just overheard echoed in his mind, searing through him like a brand. He stood there, unable to speak, a rush of anger, disbelief, and betrayal flooding over him. Sarah turned her head, her eyes widening when she saw Jake standing in the doorway. The man, too, glanced up but didn't move. He seemed to know who Jake was, but it didn't matter. They weren't trying to hide it. They weren't ashamed. Jake finally found his voice, though it was quieter than he expected. So this is how you see me, he said, his words sharp and bitter. Sarah's face twisted into an expression that bordered on annoyance and guilt, but she quickly covered it with that same practiced indifference. What are you talking about? She asked, raising an eyebrow. He clenched his fists. You think I don't know? You think I don't hear you talking about me like that? You think I don't know how much you don't care about me? She stood up slowly, crossing the room. Jake, don't be dramatic, she said with a dismissive wave. We were just talking. You know how it is. Guys just want to talk about their experiences. It's nothing serious. Nothing serious, he repeated, his voice now louder, the rage rising in him like a tidal wave. You're out of your mind? You think it's just nothing? You've been disrespecting me in every way possible, Sarah. You've made me feel like I was just something in the background, something that didn't matter. Her eyes narrowed, but he could see the shift in her expression. The guilt was still there, but it wasn't enough. Jake, you're taking this way too personally. It's not like that. You've always been so sensitive about this stuff. You want to talk about being sensitive? He snapped. How about you start caring for once? How about you show me any sign of respect? How about you stop treating me like I'm invisible? How about you stop telling him that I'm just not enough for you? The man sitting beside her stood up, a look of mild confusion on his face. Hey man, it's not like that. Jake interrupted him, stepping forward with a fury he hadn't known he still had. Oh, don't act like you didn't know. You knew exactly what was going on. She's made it clear. You think she's this perfect catch, right? You think I'm the one who's been holding her back? Sarah looked at him with an air of resignation. Jake, I don't want to fight. It's just how things are. How things are? His voice trembled with disbelief. This is how things are? So you just use me until you don't need me anymore? And now you're throwing me away? Just like that? He could see the fear flash in Sarah's eyes, but it was too late for apologies now. Too late for anything. You've already made your choice, he said, finally making the decision he had been struggling with. And I'm done. I won't be your joke anymore. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, not caring about the confusion, not caring about the apologies he knew would come. The only thing he felt now was relief. Finally, after all this time, he was done. He didn't need to explain anymore. He didn't need to justify his decision to anyone. And as he slammed the door behind him, he felt a sense of power surge through him. The silent exit had begun. Jake's footsteps echoed in the empty hallway. The house felt eerily still, as though it too had been holding its breath for what was to come. The tension that had settled over him in the past few days, ever since that disastrous confrontation with Sarah, was like a weight he couldn't shake off. But today, something inside him had shifted. The anger he'd felt in the heat of the moment had given way to something else, something far more dangerous for Sarah. Silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt like a void. No, this silence was purposeful, full of power. Jake had chosen it, just like he had chosen to walk away from her words, from the ridicule, and from the life they had once shared. He was no longer trapped in a cycle of appeasing her, of trying to make things right when they had never been right to begin with. As the days passed, Jake found himself at peace in a way he hadn't felt in years. He no longer begged for her validation. He stopped looking for affection that would never come. The more he withdrew, the more he realized how much he had been giving and how little he had received in return. His actions now were not about punishing Sarah. No, it was about taking back what was his dignity, his self-worth, his peace of mind. The sun dipped low on a late afternoon when Jake found himself sitting at the kitchen table, staring out at the street, lost in thought. His phone buzzed, the sound jarring in the quiet. It was Sarah, her name flashing across the screen. For a moment, Jake considered answering, but then he remembered. Silence was his answer now. He let the call go to voicemail. A few seconds later, her message came through. Jake, where are you? Can we talk? I don't know what's going on with us, but we need to fix this. I've made a mistake, and I know I hurt you. Please, don't just leave me like this. We can work through it. Jake closed his eyes. He wasn't angry. He didn't need to scream or lash out. What was the point? The pain of hearing her say the same empty words was nothing compared to the strength he felt now. Strength in walking away. Strength in his decision not to return to the toxic cycle she had forced him into. He wasn't going to be a part of that anymore. Instead, Jake calmly typed out a response. I'm not angry. I'm not hurt. I'm done. And you're right. This can't be fixed. It's not a mistake. It's a choice you've made. It's been a long time coming. And now, I choose myself." He hit send and leaned back in his chair, staring at the phone screen as the words sat there, hanging in the air. No back and forth, no explanations, no further words from him. That was the thing. In the past, he might have tried to explain, to justify his feelings, to force her to understand. But now the quiet was his response. The silence spoke louder than any words ever could. He didn't owe her an explanation, not anymore. And more importantly, he didn't owe anyone his energy if it wasn't returned in kind. The next few days unfolded with an unsettling calmness. Sarah tried reaching out, but Jake's silence became an impenetrable wall. She sent more texts, left more voicemails. The messages became increasingly desperate, but he ignored every single one. He didn't need to engage. He didn't need to fix anything that wasn't broken on his end. There was power in letting go, in not responding. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about seeking any kind of satisfaction. It was simply about reclaiming the power that Sarah had taken from him for so long. It was about regaining control of his life, his mind, and his soul. One afternoon, as Jake returned home from work, he noticed something strange. Sarah had left the door slightly ajar, her shoes abandoned just inside the hallway. He walked through the house, his footsteps light, but his heart heavy with an anticipation he didn't expect. When he entered the living room, he found Sarah sitting on the couch, looking at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Her eyes were wide, filled with something that resembled both frustration and fear. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. Instead, she reached for her phone, as if trying to send him a message, trying to fix things. But Jake stood there, watching her in silence. The silence was deafening now, and it felt like the room was closing in on her. Finally, after a few seconds of heavy air, Sarah spoke. "Jake, I know you're upset. I know I've been wrong. But I'm sorry. Can't we just go back to how things were before?" Jake's lips parted, but instead of speaking, he simply shook his head. He wasn't angry. He wasn't sad. He was just done. "No," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "We can't, and I'm not going to pretend anymore." Sarah's face crumpled, and for the first time she seemed lost. But Jake didn't feel pity. He didn't feel sorry for her. He felt something else, a quiet, steady resolve. He had made his decision. "I've been carrying this relationship for too long, Sarah. I've been carrying us. But you've been taking and taking, and I've given all I had. And now I'm done. This isn't something that can be fixed with apologies. It's too late for that." For a moment, Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but there was no anger left in Jake. There was nothing but clarity. He had freed himself from the lies, from the self-doubt, from the toxic need for her approval. He turned away without another word, walking toward the door. This time there was no hesitation, no lingering sense of what-ifs. He was walking away from a broken past, from a person who would never truly care. And as he stepped into the world outside, he felt the weight lift off his shoulders. The quiet strength he had embraced had set him free. Jake had never felt so sure of his decision. The air outside was crisp, the kind of cold that reminded him of how life could be sharp, clean, and unambiguous when you finally made the choice to walk away from the chaos. For weeks, he had been living in a fog of uncertainty, of questioning his worth, of holding on to a relationship that had long since decayed. But now, standing outside Sarah's apartment after the last few days of silent resolution, he could feel the weight lifting from his shoulders with every breath. He wasn't angry anymore. Number that had faded days ago, what remained now was a clarity so profound that it was almost peaceful. As Jake stood at the door, he took a moment to gather himself. He was done pleading, done trying to understand the confusion of her actions. He wasn't here to shout, to cry, or to beg for closure. No, today was about taking back his own power, an act of quiet defiance that would resonate long after this moment was over. When Sarah opened the door, her eyes widened in surprise, clearly not expecting him to show up. Not after the weeks of silence. Her hair was messy, as though she had just rolled out of bed, and for a moment, Jake noticed the subtle look of guilt that passed across her face. But it was fleeting, gone as soon as she composed herself. "Jake, what are you doing here?" Her voice was soft, too soft, as if she was trying to feign concern. He didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. He had already made up his mind. Without a word, Jake walked past her into the apartment, his heart steady, his thoughts sharp. She followed, confusion evident in her movements. Sarah started talking, fast and loud, but Jake tuned her out. He knew the game, manipulating, blaming, begging for forgiveness. He had seen it all before. But this time, he wasn't playing. He wasn't waiting for her to change or for her to apologize. Jake, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get this way. Her voice cracked. She wanted to explain, to turn this around, but it was too late. The silence he had chosen over the past few weeks had already spoken louder than any apology could. He took a deep breath, letting the words come slowly, almost as though they were just another fact he was stating, not something born of anger, but of understanding. Sarah, he said, his voice calm but unwavering, this isn't about you or me anymore. It's about the truth. You showed me exactly who you are, and now it's my turn to show you who I am. Jake reached into his pocket, pulled out a folded envelope, and handed it to her. Her eyes flickered between him and the envelope, unsure of what to expect. It was a divorce petition. Nothing more, nothing less. Sarah froze. There was no more play acting, no more hiding behind excuses. It was the final proof of what had been broken, what had been torn apart in the silence he had given her. Jake, no. She tried to reach for him, but he pulled away, taking a step back. I gave you everything, Jake said, his voice steady, and you took it all for granted. Now I'm walking away, for good. Sarah's face twisted. She knew this was the end, and for the first time Jake saw a flash of vulnerability in her eyes. Fear. She had lost control. She had lost him. And in that loss, she was realizing the true cost of her betrayal. Please don't do this. I love you, she whispered, but the words sounded hollow now, a desperate plea for something that had long since faded. Jake's expression softened, but only slightly. He had loved her once, but now it was clear that love was something she had never truly valued. I loved you too, but I didn't deserve to be made a joke. You don't owe me anything anymore, Sarah, and I won't keep playing this game. He walked to the door, his heart no longer burdened by the weight of the past. He didn't need to look back. As Jake stepped out into the cold night, he knew what was coming next. Sarah would try to make things right, but it would be too late. There was no magic word, no apology, no grand gesture that could undo the damage she had done. The silence would be her punishment. It would be a reminder every day that she had lost him, not to another woman, but to her own apathy and disregard. Back in the apartment, Sarah stood there holding the divorce papers, her face pale. Her world was crumbling, and for the first time, she truly understood the consequences of her actions. But even in her regret, there was no one left to hear her cries. The man she had taken for granted was gone, and she was left to face the emptiness. Jake walked down the street, feeling the crisp air hit his face, each step a reminder of the man he had chosen to become. Strong, self-respecting, no longer a pawn in someone else's game. In his mind, a quiet resolve settled in. No more excuses, no more waiting for someone who would never appreciate what he had given. The past was gone, and with it, the lessons learned. He had walked away from betrayal, but more importantly, he had walked away for himself. I don't owe anyone anything more than they're willing to give me in return, Jake thought to himself, his heart lighter than it had been in years. And as the city lights flickered around him, he knew one thing for sure. Sometimes the most powerful form of revenge is walking away. If this story resonated with you, don't just keep it to yourself. Hit that like button, subscribe for more powerful stories, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.